morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another episode of Better Place, talking international law with me, Jonathan Coley from RMIT University in a still locked down Melbourne, Australia. I am very pleased today to have with me to talk all things peace negotiations and transitional justice, the amazing Professor Paul Williams. I think he's the archetypal scholar practitioner of international law, and so pleased that he's come along to share some of his journey and insights with us. Paul, welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here with you to have this conversation.
And where are you joining us from?
Joining from Arlington, Virginia, just in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., from my former daughter's bedroom, hence the millennial pink background. So we shipped her off to college, and I took over her bedroom for my home study.
That's fantastic. And you kept the color because it grew on you.
Yeah, I'm still getting used to millennial pink as a backdrop for my office, but that or I'm too lazy to repaint the room.
And is the gumball machine in the background, is that yours or hers?
The gumball machine is from my childhood. It's actually a real gumball machine, not made out of plastic, made out of metal and glass, and it's so old that it only cost a penny for a gumball.
That's so cool. And do you have a stack of pennies somewhere? And
they're all in the gumball machine because I'm using it constantly. I have to rummage around my kid's closet and see if she's got any change on the floor.
That's awesome. That's beautiful. What a cherished memory. That's great. Paul, am I allowed to call you Paul, by the way?
Perfect. Yes, Jonathan.
Okay.
Excellent.
And can I, for those listening in, let me give a bit more of a formal, at-length introduction to who it is we're speaking with today. Paul R. Williams, I don't know what the R stands for. Paul R. Williams holds the Rebecca I. Grazier Professorship in Law and International Relations at American University in Washington, D.C. Professor Williams teaches at the School of International Service and the Washington College of Law, and also directs the joint JD MA program in International Relations. Professor Williams, and this is, I think, why we are really coming to talk to you today, is the co-founder of the Public International Law and Policy Group, PILPG for short. We were just saying before, it does need a few extra vowels to roll off the tongue. Anyway. And the PILPG, the Public International Law and Policy Group, is a non-profit group which provides pro bono legal assistance to states and governments, and I should add non-state actors, I believe, as well, involved in peace negotiations, post-conflict constitution drafting, and war crimes prosecutions. Over the course of his legal practice, Professor Williams has assisted over 24 peace negotiations, has advised governments across Europe, Asia, as well as North and Sub-Saharan Africa on state recognition, self-determination, and state succession issues, and also including the drafting of post-conflict constitutions. Prior to his arrival at American University, Professor Williams spent time as a senior associate with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and as a Fulbright research scholar at the University of Cambridge. Professor Williams also served at the US Department of State in the Office of the Legal Advisor. Professor Williams is the author of 5 books, I believe, with a 6th one coming out soon, hopefully, on a variety of topics such as international human rights, international environmental law, and international norms of justice. He has written dozens upon dozens of journal articles on a wide variety of topics. He holds a PhD from Cambridge, a law degree from Stanford, which we will not hold against him. Go Bears. And an undergraduate degree from UC Davis. Okay, and there ends the interview. We have no time for anything else.
I'm surprised you're giving Stanford on one end and California on the other end. UC Davis on the other end. I'm surprised as a Go Bears that you're even talking to me, Jonathan.
Well, you know, sometimes we have to come down and talk to the riffraff, Stanford. it's an inside joke for those that don't know. Cal, UC Berkeley, where I went and got a few degrees, is across the bay from Stanford, and we enjoy every year chopping down your tree.
Which is our mascot, which looks like a dollar sign. So, Jonathan, this rivalry even goes deeper than that. My best friend from kindergarten went to Cal, which for those of you who aren't from California, there are a number of University of California schools, University of California at Berkeley, at Davis, at Irvine, and Davis was actually the initial farm school for University of California at Berkeley. And so Stu would say, oh, so how's it out there at the farm? And of course, he was always wearing a baseball cap that said Cal. And it's like, you do know of the nearly a dozen University of California schools, Berkeley is the only one that simply says Cal. Exactly like you did, Jonathan, in the introduction. Well, the rest of us have to explain UC Davis, UC Riverside.
This has taken an interesting turn already, Paul. All right, let's get back on to more serious stuff. Did I miss anything?
No, that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, and I am collecting favorite ice cream flavors, please, of practitioners of international law. What is yours?
So mine is a Jamocha almond fudge, mint chocolate chip, hot fudge sundae, extra hot fudge. I am serious about my ice cream.
I dare you to say that again. You just made that up.
No, Jamocha almond fudge. It's got the coffee buzz. It's got the fudge, mint chocolate chip. You got those dark chocolate chips. And if you're going for a hot fudge sundae, you got to get double hot fudge.
So where do you get that from?
So discovered this in Leicester Square in London. There was a Baskin Robbins right next to one of the theaters, and they had this amazing ice cream person. And when you ordered hot fudge, she would do a layer of hot fudge on the bottom and then put in the mint chocolate chip, the Jamocha almond fudge ice cream, and then she put another layer of hot fudge on the top.
Okay.
Didn't you need whipped cream or cherries? You're good to go. With
I haven't lived, clearly. All right. Well, that's unique. Now, I'm still in lockdown in September 2020 when we are recording this interview in Melbourne, Australia. Slightly different in the States, I understand. But you did have some restrictions in 2020. Paul, did you learn any new hobbies? Did you learn a new language? What did you do during COVID?
I survived. I got a bumper sticker that says I survived, or at least am surviving.
Right.
What was interesting was we've both with teaching and with PILPG, this sort of Zoom world or this remote world has been an opportunity to rethink what matters and to rethink how to have an impact, how to make a difference, because things have changed. They'll continue to change. There'll be a remote dimension to everything we do. We'll get the vaccine, we'll move through COVID, but there's no security in the status quo anymore. We have to prepare as professionals to pivot to meet our students where they are in order to teach them in whatever the circumstances demand and however they're responding to it. You and I have been trained for years of standing up and interacting with students in person. We don't have that option now or even for the foreseeable future. And so, you and I both have this obligation and our colleagues in academia to figure out how to do a better job. And then running a global pro bono law firm, how do you provide pro bono legal assistance around the globe over the internet? I've been astounded at the adaptability of our pro bono clients to move to technology, to continue to make progress on their constitutions, their peace negotiations. But basically, to answer you short, it's been surviving, trying to adapt and pivot to, still provide high quality teaching and legal assistance, and not just we'll just Zoom through this for 6 months until things get back to normal, because things have changed.
Well, I know you're not a fan of mediocrity, even under immense trying times. So, bravo for all the innovation that you have embraced. I'm curious, though, what is your many accomplishments, obviously, and I only had time to rattle off a few. And we'll get into a little bit more about what it is that you do at PILPG as the interview proceeds. But what's the career accomplishment that you're most proud of?
I suppose the career accomplished that I'm most proud of is launching PILPG when I was 29 years old. And this actually comes from a mentor that you and I share, Ambassador Mort Abramowitz, who was the president of the Carnegie Endowment and then a senior fellow at the Century Fund where you worked with Mort. And I wasn't really aware of this until I was having a conversation with Mort. And Mort had reached out when I was in my early 30s and offered me a position at the Carnegie Endowment as a senior associate. And it took me literally decades later before I had finally said to Mort, I said, so Mort, why exactly did you hire me as a senior associate, 20 years ago? And he said, well, because you build things. I was like, what? He's like, well, I'm inspired by young professionals who build things, and you were building this global pro bono law firm. I'm like, well, Mort, it was really just a pocket NGO. My friends and I who had left the State Department and were teaching, we kind of missed practicing public international law. So we created this NGO so that we could do peace negotiations and assist with prosecuting war criminals. And he's like, well, that wasn't the elevator speech you gave me when I interviewed you. You were talking about your dream to build a global pro bono law firm, and you went off and you did that.
Yeah.
But it really inspired me and got me thinking about when you're doing these things, there's senior professionals out there who themselves are inspired by innovation, entrepreneurship, and people who build things. Lots of us want to make a difference, want to have an impact, but you need a platform. And your own platform, I had not realized the value and the ability to amplify what I wanted to do by having my own platform and then building a team around that platform or to share that platform with. And so that's what's been enjoyable. My wife teases me. This is a long answer to your question, Jonathan, but my wife always teases me. Your website says, global pro bono law firm, but what it really should say, Paul and his friends trying not to be bored while they're trying to make a difference. And she's like, look, everybody that you engage with in PILPG, they're all friends of yours from years back. And that's what we've been able to do. It's a community, it's a platform, and it's where my friends and I can get together, my professional colleagues, and do peace talks, war crimes prosecution.
Yeah, okay. So, and I've introduced a little bit about PILPG and you've also danced around it. What is it? I'll get to PILPG in a second. Paul, what is it that you do in one sentence?
Lawyer peace. So what I do is I provide legal assistance. I pick sides to parties that are involved in peace negotiations or drafting constitutions, post-conflict constitutions, or prosecuting war criminals.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll get all to that in a second. One thing you didn't say, lawyer peace, you didn't say scholar or teacher, but that is a key part of what you do.
Well, you only gave me one sentence, Jonathan.
Oh, okay.
This is like a very short elevator speech. We got off the elevator at the third floor. So if we're going to the 10th floor in the elevator, and then I try to sort of track knowledge sharing. This whole notion of, in corporate America and also in Australia and other places, knowledge management, knowledge sharing, knowledge transfer is key to the survivability of a corporate enterprise. But also, I think in terms of our field, public international law, peace negotiations, transitional justice and accountability, also generating knowledge, sharing that knowledge, and training the next generation of young professionals. And it's not just telling them war stories. I do tell my war stories in class, as my students will, literally war stories, as my my students will tell you. But it's also about generating the knowledge and sharing it. And so you had alluded to I have a book coming out with Cambridge University Press, and the title is simply Lawyering Peace. And the idea basically is to share the insights about how the parties figured out solutions to the conundrums that they're facing. Monopoly for human rights, things along those lines.
PILPG is a fascinating concept. So I just want to spend a little bit of time unpacking what that actually means. Public International Law and Policy Group, and a global pro bono law firm is the actual slogan, not I quite like your wife's version. It's a fascinating concept. So you're a law firm, essentially, a bunch of lawyers that service governments and non-governments in waiting, not non-state actors. You mentioned that you pick sides. I mean, so sometimes you're approached by multiple parties in a conflict and you literally have to pick a side?
Yeah, so the best way to describe this is our very first client. I served as a legal advisor to the Bosnian delegation during the Dayton peace negotiations. And it was Ambassador Sasha Bey and Sven Alkali who came to me. It was at the Jefferson Hotel in Washington, D.C., and I had left the State Department and I was at Cambridge, but I was in Washington for some meetings. And they said, hey, would you like to come to Bosnia? And sorry, to Dayton, and to be our lawyer, one of our lawyers for our delegation in the peace process. And I was like, okay, sure, that sounds fine. I'd love to do that, but you're a country, you're an emerging country. I assume you have lawyers. And said, yeah, we have lots of lawyers, but it was the former Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia. We didn't do a lot of specialization in peace negotiations or human rights or accountability mechanisms. And so you've got your experience from State Department, you've got your PhD work. Will you fly out and join our delegation? Mm-hmm. So of course I called my wife and I said, hey, can I have that credit card number that you, and charge at Eloise, and hopped on a plane a couple weeks later to go to Dayton. And basically when I showed up, one of the captains from the U.S. Air Force Base, from the Wright-Patterson Air Base, picked me up at the airport and he said, oh, Paul, you've been giving us heartburn. And I'm like, why? And it's like, well, we couldn't figure out which delegation to put you on. I'm like, well, I'm on the Bosnian delegation. He's like, yeah, but we can pronounce your name. We can't pronounce anything. President Izbegovic, or Prime Minister Salajic, or Milosac Begovic. So it was, and then that's when it struck me that there's actually a substantial need for someone who has an arc of experience. And I had an experience of one, but over time, and we started working with the Kosovar Albanians and the Montenegrins, and then the Georgians, the Armenians, and others, that there's a huge value for lawyering peace. There's a lot of professionals involved in mediation, in working with all sides, or with an NGO advocating for human rights or for democratization. All exceedingly essential and valuable. But there isn't a community of lawyers in the peace negotiation universe that work for parties. And so that's why I use the phrase, we pick sides. Uh-huh. My colleagues will ask me, well, how is it that you are actually sort of in the negotiations in Doha? Or at the moment, we're providing legal assistance on the Sudan peace negotiations. And in Geneva, we were with the Syrians. It's like, how do you actually get in the peace talks? And for me, it's straightforward. Well, you're a lawyer, you have clients. Your clients want you to be there, helping them to get to yes, get to checkmate, or as some of my clients say, make the other side cry. And that's what gives you that entree, that e-ticket ride, or that all events pass.
So there's a need for the lawyers, but how do the clients find you? How do they engage you? What is that? Presumably, you're not hanging out at the Jefferson Hotel bar looking for clients.
That would be nice if that part I could replicate over and over and over. That would be the way to do it. It's old-fashioned word of mouth. It's when these countries, the non-state actors, are entering negotiations or seeking recognition, they basically cast about to their colleagues and friends who are former non-state actors and in our governments, and ask, well, how did you build up your capacity? And this happened with us in Libya with the fall of the Gaddafi regime, when we went to we got a phone call from some of our colleagues who were working on the Libyan constitution and other transitional justice issues, and they had come to us by way of some of our Syrian clients that we had been pro bono work, who'd come to us by way of some of the work we'd been doing in Iraq. Then it was a similar story to Bosnia when we showed up. Phenomenally talented lawyers in Libya. They were all oil and gas lawyers. That's the only thing you could do under the Gaddafi regime if you were remaining in Libya and you wanted to have a legal talent. But they were able to pivot quite quickly to be human rights lawyers, constitutional lawyers, other types of specialties.
So part of your job then is
reach out to somebody and pull somebody in and say, you've done this before, you've written about it, you've thought about it, you've got the experience, and so has recommended, can you pop on by to Tripoli and have a conversation with us about how we do this?
Right, and I was going to just add, as a part of the task, maybe a secondary objective is to train up that local talent in constitution writing and human rights and rule of law. That's great stuff. I'm curious, though, if I can sort of double back on the Bosnia scenario. Did PILPG, did your platform come first before Bosnia, or did Bosnia, your first client, come first?
So it came about as a result of Dayton, Ohio, and Windsor, UK, and a pub called the Round Hill Pub with Old Speckled Hen. So this is the story. Came back from Bosnia, and I got a call from the Macedonian ambassador and asked if I would come by their embassy and have a chat. And I came by, and he said, Paul, we'd like to sort of work with you and your firm to provide assistance to President Gligorov on the issue with the Greeks. The Macedonians had a name issue, they had a flag issue, they had a currency issue, fighting over the sort of the legacy of Alexander the Great. And my answer is, yeah, my firm and I, we'd love to provide assistance. And so that evening, my wife, who was working in management consulting, we went, and she had a flat in Windsor next to the Irish Guards, and we went to this pub and had a couple of Old Speckled Hens, which was the local brew. And we decided, based on her guidance, that I would create a global pro bono law firm. It was pro bono because she was like, well, yeah, you're like 29 years old. No one's going to pay you to do peace negotiations. So you might as well just embrace it and start out being pro bono. And, law firm, get some of your friends together who are lawyers, get a nonprofit. So we're a nonprofit, we're 501c3, but we were started in London and Boston. And she basically said, look, amplify your network of friends and professional colleagues and have this status as a nonprofit, and then go forth and get a little bit of marketing, get a coffee mug with your logo on it, and then you're able to, and then you're real. You get a coffee mug and a business card, and you're real. And then I called up Mike Scharf, who was a professor in Boston, and we just sort of launched this entity. And it was when we applied for our nonprofit status. After you get nonprofit status interim, then 5 years later, you get a permanent nonprofit status. The IRS processor actually called us and said, you do know this whole pro bono thing, you can actually apply for grants, because we just sort of started working, and we don't charge any of our clients. It's all pro bono, and I was on the Fulbright grant at Cambridge, and Mike was teaching. So we just did our thing. And so when we went to fill out the paperwork for the IRS, it was like, over 5 years, we had, booked $20,000 of income or something. And she was like, you don't have to take this pro bono thing quite so seriously. You can actually go forth and get grants. And we've done that, and it's grown into quite the enterprise over the last 25 years. But
so it remains pro bono, Paul? You don't charge your clients?
We never charge our clients. We leverage resources. So there's 2 or 3 main areas of resources. We receive grants from foundations. The Carnegie Corporation provided us substantial resources for the first decade. As we mentioned, Mortar Bromwitz early on, when he brought me on board at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, I was a senior associate, and for a couple of years, and my task was to build PILPG. And Mort did something exceedingly valuable. He rang up a friend of his at the law firm of Wilmer Cutler in Pickering. It's now Wilmer Hale and Dorf. It was Wilmer Cutler in Pickering. And Mort said, yeah, I have a friend over at Wilmer Cutler in Pickering, and you should pop over there. And I gave him a ring, and I said, look, I've got this young lawyer. He's building a global pro bono law firm. You should give him some pro bono advice. I said, great, what's your friend's name? Well, Lloyd Cutler. And of course, Lloyd Cutler was the White House counsel for President Jimmy Carter. And so I went over to Wilmer Cutler in Pickering, had a meeting with Lloyd Cutler. And he had a colleague there, Shelby Quast, one of his senior associates. And he said, well, yeah, Paul, I understand you do something. It's peace negotiations. It's a nonprofit, and Mort said I had to give you some free legal advice. I'd like you to meet Shelby. Shelby's going to give you some free legal advice. And we started working on peace negotiations together. And Wilmer Cutler was a huge supporter of PILPG, and that was followed by Baker McKenzie and Sullivan and Cromwell and Sherman and Sterling and a number of other global firms. And so at the moment, and this may be TMI or too much detail, 3/4 of the assistance that PILPG is able to generate and provide comes from pro bono contributions of 12 of the top 15 global law firms. There's a huge interest, DLA Piper, O'Melveny & Myers. There's a huge interest among big law to provide pro bono legal assistance, and then we're that platform to amplify it.
And so sometimes, though, the lawyers that are at these large commercial law firms are actually seconded and sit with you in PILPG offices, and other times are just doing bits and bobs.
Yes, there's a long history. So Oric Harrington, for instance, seconded Betsy Popkin to us for 2 years to work on the Darfur process, which then we rolled her. Then she went back to the firm and then came back to us a few years later, again seconded by Oric, to do a 1.5 years in Istanbul, running our office there, working with the Syrian opposition on their negotiations. Milbank, Tweed, Hadley, McCoy, which goes by Milbank, seconded Tom Santoro to go to Kenya to work with us and run our office there. Cleary Gottlieb is rolling in, a bright young lawyer.
I can tell you're just rattling off all the sponsors. I've got a few
getting airtime too. I'm trying to remember which one I forgot that's going to watch this video and get that email. So, but the idea being that they're really global and they dive into it. And so when we did our Rohingya, we sent a team of 18 war crimes investigators to the Bangladesh refugee camps for the Rohingya. We interviewed over 1,000 of the refugees. This was State Department supported. It's now been cited by the International Criminal Court. The irony is there. OREC helped us translate these 1,000 interviews into categories of, does this meet the standard for a crime against humanity, for war crime, or genocide? And they literally put over 100 lawyers going through these thousands upon thousands of pages of information, testimony from these refugees, and then figuring out, okay, can you build a case? And this is something that would have been way beyond our capacity to do. But getting the world's best lawyers to help you do your lawyering.
And how was that? I believe that was 2018. I think your report was published online, and I will put a link to the PILPG website. It is up. How was that? Did you go to Cox's Bazar, and that must have been you must have been rather confronted by some of the things you heard.
It was pretty astounding. So we deployed for 2 months. I went out for the first period of time, and then Andrew Mann, who was a recently retired former diplomat, had been chargé d'affaires in Sri Lanka before that. He came out for the 2 months and basically helped to manage and shepherd the 18 war crimes investigators. And these are investigators that had worked at various tribunals. And a number of them had worked on the Darfur issue, had worked on the Bosnia issue, and they reflected sort of my view, which was, wow, we have never seen something like this before. The intensity, the systematic nature, the drive to, the Genocide Convention provides for the destruction in whole or in part. They were taking the whole seriously. It was really literally wiping the Rohingya off the map. And that was what was stunning. And then of course they're in refugee camps in Bangladesh, which is down in Cox's Bazar, is highly, highly isolated. So it was pretty stunning in terms of what they had suffered.
In a few years before, did you not represent some of the Burmese opposition forces as well, Aung San Suu Kyi's.
Yeah, we had worked with the NLD, which is Aung San Suu Kyi's party, on the whole issue of constitutional reform, elections, some type of transition from the junta. This has been
reflections. I mean, look at her now. She flies to The Hague to defend the Tatmadaw.
It's astounding. There are lessons to be learned from how we idealize and how we project upon others what we think they should be thinking and what they should be believing. And I think it's a real wake-up call to all of us who went all in on the democratic transformation of Burma, Myanmar, and have been not only disappointed, but to launch a campaign of genocide against your own people is stunning, and I think causes us all to reflect on when you're fighting for human rights, democratic reform, peace, cessation of hostilities, you cannot be discouraged from doing that. But being clear-eyed is definitely a lesson I took away from this.
Peace with justice, ? I mean, that sort of sums up, well, without the question mark.
There's no question mark, Jonathan. What are you talking about?
Well,
peace with justice, exclamation mark.
Well, Paul, I believe a few decades ago, you wrote an article called Peace with Justice, and I wanted to ask you about that question mark, because the title of that piece actually does have a question mark, and it was about the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, I believe.
Yes. So, shameless self-promotion. So shameless self-promotion 20 years ago. But the reason why I send this cover to my students every time I teach a class, because, it does have a question mark. Oh, man,
it does, right.
Yes, it does have a question mark right after there. I'm going to change that to an exclamation mark. I tell my students, right, so as a faculty member, you're not going to know my political views. You're not going to know my views on the issues except one, and that's peace with justice. I'm a huge fan that you cannot have a durable peace without justice. And this is why I like this picture, because it shows Milosevic shaking hands with a smiling Warren Christopher, shows Milosevic shaking hands with a frowning Richard Holbrooke, and then it shows Milosevic in the dock in The Hague with two burly Dutch guards. They found like the two most burly Dutch guards to put into this picture.
Not smiling anymore.
You can't dance with the devil and not get burned. One of Holbrooke's favorite phrases was, well, Milosevic is the arsonist, but he's also the fireman. No, you cannot be the arsonist and the fireman. So yes, you've touched on my only thing that I disclosed to my students about my fervent.
So, I mean, it sounds like the question mark then is a mistake. So I look forward to that being rectified. But that's kind of what I wanted to ask you. What does international law have to do with peace? This classic debate, peace versus justice. It seems like you want to have your cake and eat it too, Paul.
I want durability. So I have a cupcake from my 6th year birthday. My mom was I have 2 cupcakes. My mom was an artist, and so I would take the time and go downstairs and get it off the shelf and bring it back. But it's Snoopy, and she decorated the cupcake with the Snoopy. I still have this cupcake 49 years later. My wife also, when I was an undergrad, we met in undergrad. She made brownies and cut them out in heart shapes. I still have one of those brownies on my bookshelf. So my cake, yes, I want my cake, and I want it to be durable. I want it to last decades. And the only way you're going to do that is if you extract the war criminals from the political scene.
So, I mean, I'm inclined to agree that peace, the sustainable peace needs to be built on justice. That's my personal view. But I guess there are others out there that say, kind of like the Richard Holbrooke, the very pragmatic approach. We don't, or the Yitzhak Rabin approach. We don't choose who we make peace with. We make peace with our enemies.
So we made peace in Dayton with Milosevic. And what did he do? He attacked Kosovo, pushed out 1.2 million ethnic Albanians from Kosovo. Sierra Leone, the United Nations sponsored peace talks in the Lomé Agreement, made peace with Fonseca of the RUF, and they gave him the chair of the Diamond Exchange. What did he do? He went to Sierra Leone and he captured UN peacekeepers, held them hostage. The Brits had to go in and rescue them. And then, of course, they created a tribunal and arrested him and prosecuted him. The United Nations Gulf Cooperation Council for Yemen, Article 1 says President Saleh has immunity. What did he do with that immunity? He teamed up with the Houthis and tipped Yemen into this catastrophic civil war. Yeah, we make peace with our enemies. We sign, we dance with the devil, and we get burned. If you look at places where they've had intensive engagement of war crimes prosecution, you're much more likely to find a durable settlement than when you did the let's get to yes, let's get a handshake, let's move on.
And so I imagine that personal sort of view, I'm not even going to call it a political view, it's just a human view, isn't it, of life in the world, that shapes who you choose as clients, I presume.
Yeah. So the good news is, since we're doing this pro bono, we can pick our clients, right. And it's you have to do your due diligence when you're engaging in any activity, and it's a risky when you're picking sides, but right. You start with the Bosnians, they were the victims of genocide. The Kosovo Albanians, they were the victims of crimes against humanity. We worked with the Darfur non-state actors, again, genocide, as Colin Powell had indicated. The Rohingya, any way you look at it, the Rohingya are the victims in this. And so, sometimes it's a bit murkier and there's not everything is, crystal clear one way or the other, but we strive to focus on. It's also why we focus on the prosecution of war criminals. We'll work with judges. We've helped train up some of the initial cohorts of judges. We've helped countries establish hybrid mechanisms or domestic war crimes. A number of my colleagues do phenomenal work defending war criminals or alleged war criminals, and that has to be part of the process. But we are very cautious about doing the peace talks and then the prosecution aspect. Otherwise, it can become muddled. So again, that's the benefit of having an NGO. And like I said, a number of my former students actually are high profile in the criminal defense world, which is fantastic. There's also a number that are working for the prosecution of the ICC and working for some other tribunals, which is also fantastic.
Paul, your personal journey, you've already mentioned a little bit about a few things, a few moments that led you to create PILPG. They all happen to involve drinking and pubs, which is great. But so I'm curious if you could go back further and what did you want to do when you grew up, back in high school?
I wanted to be a real estate lawyer in Marin County with a nice little house. And I grew up in Silicon Valley. I grew up in Cupertino, and I had worked for a Main Street law firm with Mr. Jackson. It was 10 lawyers. I thought, this is the ideal life. And I've got a Cal story for you. You might have to edit this part out of your video. So I went to one of the lawyers. He was a Main Street lawyer. He worked there. He'd gone to Stanford, and I had said, I'm weighing whether I should go to Cal or I should go to Stanford for law school. And he said, look, here's the deal. You go to either one of those, and you can work wherever you want in the United States. And you go to Stanford and you can work wherever you want around the globe. And again, this is just the Stanford Cal sort of thing. And I was like, okay, but you've chosen to have an amazing life doing corporate law and real estate law here in Cupertino. He said, yeah, and I have that choice. And so if you go to Cal or you go to Stanford, you'll have a choice, whatever you want to do. And so I went to Stanford wanting to do real estate law. And then one of my mentors was Buzz Thompson, and he taught water law. And I was like, water law. And as he walked me through, the appropriative rights, the riparian rights, and the conflict, and all the, California, now everybody knows about water scarcity in California. And so that attracted me to, and this is sort of the part about this series for the young professionals. This is my stories directed to the young professionals, because they always come to me and say, I want to do this. I want to specialize in this. I'm like, whoa, get some skills and see where you go. And so I was doing water law. And then Stanford had this program where you could go spend a semester doing something. And I was going to do legal aid in San Jose. one of my Canadian friends, Andrew Mackay Johnson, said, "Go to Europe." And I was like, "And do what?" And he said, "I don't know, go to Europe." So I sent out applications. My phone rang, and it was Jerry Toman from the Red Cross Research Institute, the Henri Dunant Institute. And he said, "Paul, come to Geneva for the spring of your second year of law school and write a book on prisoners' rights." And I was like, "Okay, that sounds good." And this, those of you who are watching, the Henri Dunant Institute is it's the old house of the chair of the chemistry department from the University of Geneva, and it's right there on the lake. And it was a beautiful setting. And I was like, wow, this international law thing, I can get into this. Living in Geneva, I upgraded from beer to wine and looking out the window onto Lake Geneva. And then one evening, Jerry called me down to his office and it said, "So, Paul, what's your PhD going to be in?" And I was like, "Yeah, Jerry, you do know that I'm in law school, right?" And he's like, yeah. But when you get your PhD," and I had never thought about getting a PhD. And he basically spent a half an hour walking me through, why it would be, helpful and interesting to do that. And so when I went back to law school, I try to avoid telling my students this, but I actually took one class in international law in law school. And now I'm a professor and I teach advanced international law stories. And I'm like, yeah, I took one class from Barry Carter.
Did you do okay?
Still trading off of those 14 weeks. And then the sort of, and this is sort of a really long answer to your question, but then I went to Colorado to work with Justice Erickson on the Colorado State Supreme Court, because Colorado has a tremendous number of water law disputes and mining disputes, environmental. And then when I left there, I went to work at the State Department, because I was still thinking Department of Justice, Land and Natural Resources, or State Department. And David Stewart, after they made me the job offer, I said, David, I'm thinking, and he teaches now at Georgetown, across the city from American University. He said, come here at the State Department. It's more fun. I was like, wait, this is how we make our decisions? Where'd you get a PhD? Because you're supposed to. You should come to the State Department because it's more fun. And I showed up at the State Department a week after the August coup in the former Soviet Union. This is when Yeltsin was standing on the tanks, and they'd had the coup, and they were the old Soviets were trying to come back into power. The hardliners that Gorbachev had moved out. And I spent 2 years dealing with dissolution of Soviet Union, the Yugoslavia conflict. This is when the Europeans had signed the Maastricht Treaty. There was sort of all of these challenging and interesting issues, and that's what really solidified my interest in stocks and then in public international law. But I give that example because it was real estate law in Marin County, which is north of San Francisco. It's the suburb. The idyllic suburb north of San Francisco. And that just sort of, depending on my mentors, Buzz, Jerry, Justice Erickson, that's how the path becomes. And of course, my students leave my office thinking, I didn't learn anything. I get no idea now how to get a job in public international law.
And imagine, when you shot off all those applications for a summer clerkship or summer experience in law school, if you weren't there for that phone call and someone else had got in first, you might have accepted. And what if? Yeah, no, it's if you look back on, as you and I both look back on our lives, it's the what ifs. And I don't know if this story is true or not, but this is the story that I was told, is when they started at the State Department. When I started, there were myself and another colleague, and there were two positions, one in the Arbitration Bureau and one in the European Affairs Bureau. And they needed to make a decision. So the deputy legal advisor flipped a coin, and they called it heads or tails. Now, I don't know whether I was the heads or the tails. I don't know if I was the one that got picked or the other one got picked, but it's that the story I was told is I ended up doing, peace negotiations in Yugoslavia, dissolution of Soviet Union, because of the flip of a coin, because they had to make a decision as to which lawyer went to which bureau. And I could have just as easily been doing the Iranian claims tribunal work as this. So it's you never know. But I do sort of, we'll end this particular arc with the Malcolm Grant story. Malcolm was my supervisor at Cambridge and then eventually became the president provost of UCL. And I asked Malcolm, I said, and my PhD was in international environmental law, and I had asked him, so Malcolm,
why, out of that stack of applications you get for PhDs that want to come here, why did you pick mine? And he's like, you seemed interesting. I was like, and brilliant, or and inquisitive, and intellectually, like, oh, you just seemed interesting, and I was like, wow, okay, so don't tell anybody, this is how it actually works. I guess we did just tell everybody how it actually works.
We do receive a fair few applications, don't we, that cross our desk. I'm sure yours more than mine. And that does resonate with me, that there is some truth to that, isn't there? Be interesting. It's a good message. You only spent almost, I don't even think you hit the 2-year mark, though, at the State Department. I'm not sure, but my sources tell me it was 23 months. Why such a short stint? Were you not having fun in the end?
So that's a very specific answer to your question. They rotate you every 2 years. I was having too much fun, and then they rotate, and so as a young lawyer, you have to rotate to the next bureau. And I thought, oh, I'll take a year leave of absence, because the positions that were coming up weren't that exciting or interesting. I thought I'll take a year of absence and get my LLM in the UK. It's not quite a PhD, but it's on the, it'll be a great experience. And my wife had said, well, if you get an LLM, that's 9 months. It'd be different. And she was getting her master's at American University, her MBA. It would be hard to, sort of go and work. Why don't you get a PhD like Jerry wanted you to do? And then we can go for 3 years, and then I can get a job. Little did I know that in the UK, the job comes with a flat and a company car and all these. I would have been much more into that. And so I morphed my LLM application into a PhD application, and then applied for the Fulbright. And then I talked to my colleagues at State, and they're like, look, people come to State and they work for 4, 5, or 6 years, and then they go to teaching, or they stay here forever. Yeah. You're not going to stay here forever, because you're too I'm a Gemini. And so, I'm always like, looking at both sides of everything. And and I said, so go now, take the, and this was, Mike Sharf, who'd been there for 5 or 6 years and then moved into teaching, Sean Murphy, who'd been there for 6 years and moved into teaching, Jose Alvarez, same thing. They were the ones who were giving me this advice of, if you got that teed up, we're going to miss you, but maybe come to think about it, maybe their strategy was, okay, move on now. But State Department is a phenomenal place to go and learn and practice public international.
And you landed then at Carnegie Endowment. You've already spoken about that. Our dear friend and a mentor that I share with you, Mort Bromowitz, was the president at the time. Yes. And it was funny, again, it's not the Mort show, but he also had his fingerprints all over the International Crisis Group as well, that he helped found as well, didn't he?
Mort loved to build things. For being a 30-year career diplomat, he loved to build things, and so he was instrumental in in building and launching the International Crisis Group. And he was there from day one, in terms of basically this notion of having a political political affairs bureau outside of the state. Just as I was sort of in a much smaller way, hey, former State Department lawyers, let's practice some public international law. Mort had an amazing community of retired diplomats who'd done, political affairs work that weren't being put to use, other than sort of getting paid by Pepsi-Cola or somebody to to lobby. So he was essentially, he wanted to get his community together of political affairs and former ambassadors, and provide that type of top flight political analysis to policymakers and to countries in conflict and transition. And then to advocate. Right.
And I can absolutely feel how the idea of PILPG would resonate with him, how he'd get excited about that, and a young enthusiastic lawyer that goes to set it up. Paul, so fast forward to that career in PILPG. What was the most challenging peace deal you've ever worked on?
The most challenging peace deal, I would say it's probably the Sudanese peace deal, and it's partly what's in my mind at the moment. But it's so multi-layered, so multifaceted. The Sudanese, with Bashir in jail, hopefully on his way to the International Criminal Court, they're undergoing a democratic transformation, and in order to be successful, they've got to sort Darfur. They're sorting it. They have to sort Southern Kordofan, Blue Nile. They're sorting it. This has also prompted the East, the North, and the Central regions to also say, right, we have issues, marginalization as well. And so they are at light speed working to solve these conflicts so they can move into constitutional negotiations and lock in this democratic transformation before there's a counter-revolution of the old NCP or Bashir's old cohort. Don't think that's going to happen, but they want to lock this democratic. So you're doing peace talks throughout the entire country and also moving forward with this democratic transformation. So everything is happening on a lot of different layers.
Right, and as we speak anyway, ongoing, yet to be finalised. So fingers crossed with that. What about the surprisingly easiest sort of peace negotiations you've been involved with?
Well, I'll tell you the most fun peace negotiation, and this was Nagorno-Karabakh. So President Truman would spend some time in the winter down at the Key West winter White House. And so on Key West Island, there's Truman's old winter White House. And so when Kerry, the envoy, wanted to do a mediation between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh, he had the negotiations in Key West, Florida.
Yes, you do.
A fun place to have peace negotiations.
Better than Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
I got made fun of by everybody. Hence the no jacket today. I've learned my lesson. But I took my jacket and tie down to Key West, and needless to say, you could spot the lawyer coming from a mile away. They even got the president and foreign minister of Armenia to wear the parrot shirts, the Jimmy Buffett shirts. It was challenging. There still is no peace there in Nagorno-Karabakh, but it was an interesting, real sort of cognitive dissonance between the Jimmy Buffett songs and the tourists and the cruise ships. And we stayed at the Hilton, the Radisson, and the Four Seasons, I think. There were three hotels. So do you think location has anything to do with the success of peace negotiations? I'm thinking Camp David, I'm thinking Dayton, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, that story. Rather than being in situ, is it good to take the actors out? I think it plays well for the memoirs. Certainly gives me a fun story to tell about the Nagorno-Karabakh negotiations. And the whole Dayton was the isolation. I think it's the nature of the venue. So the Rambouillet Chateau for the Kosovar negotiations. Okay, it's Rambouillet, it's in a chateau, it's not at the barracks or Packy's restaurant, where a lot of the side negotiations happened at the officers club. It's but it's the isolation. So both the Rambouillet Chateau and the Dayton Accords were secure, they were isolated. You could create parity among the parties. Serbia obviously had access to its embassy, but it's much more difficult to use those resources. And it gives a sense of parity among the parties. Camp David's the same way. It's secure, it's isolated. But then sometimes the parties aren't able to move. And this is one reason why for Sudan, why the peace talks are being held in Juba, because it's a place that the non-state actors and the non-state armed actors can come and go. Whereas if you were doing it in Geneva or Paris or London, it would be more difficult. But yeah, selecting the venue is always, I do negotiations with my simulations with my students, and we did one simulation and they only could figure out on Iceland. Reykjavik was the only place they could agree, because once you sort of start crossing out all of the different reasons why you can't go somewhere, and it's like, yeah, well, you just learned a very valuable lesson. This is real life. Pick a venue. It's why everyone goes to Geneva, not because they like the Swiss chocolate. Well, they do, but also because it's the fondue. It's the fondue, not the chocolate. The fondue. It is the fondue, yes. You don't just do peace negotiations at PILPG. You also do get involved in transitional justice in that post-conflict moment of a country's life as well. And in particular, writing constitutions. I'm wondering, is that the most intimidating thing you do? I think you've helped advise the Nepalese and the Iraqis, for example, on their constitutions. This is the most important bit of law. I mean, this will be the foundation stone for their new country. And you're helping write it. And it's exciting to work on the post-conflict constitutions. As you said, we've worked in Nepal and in Iraq and in a number of places in the Balkans on these, and then also in Libya and in Egypt. And it's a little bit similar to peace negotiations. I'm always a little bit puzzled about you're bringing in an international, and they're like, look, we're bringing you in for your comparative state practice. Don't talk to us about the United States. And we actually have a personal rule. I never pitch the U.S. Constitution. That context is so distant and literally out of context. But what other countries have done is that they've emerged from conflict in their constitutions. That's what the Iraqis, the Libyans, et cetera. And the same thing, whenever I asked, well, where are your constitutional lawyers? Well, who the heck was going to be a constitutional lawyer in Iraq? It's not something that's a good career move. Same with Libya. Nepal, there were some constitutional lawyers, but again, it was a monarchy before they moved into their peace negotiations. And so, and then the post-conflict constitution drafting. But it's also one of those places where lawyers are hugely valuable. How do you craft a human rights provision? How do you craft power sharing, vertical, horizontal power sharing? How do you provide for monopoly of force? The parties know what they want at the first, second, and third level, but to distill it to writing so that it actually works and is durable requires going down to the fifth and the sixth level. And that's where the lawyering piece skill set comes into play.
We all look forward to reading the book when it comes out.
You notice I'm working that in? I'm doing a good job. This is an infomercial. You thought this was bringing you to a better place. It's like, no, it's an infomercial.
I can just see the social media tweets. It's all just going to be hashtags of your sponsors and donors and your books.
Hold on a second. Let me
yes, check. Make sure no one's missed out. We still have a few moments. Paul, a few reflections from you on international law. I'm curious. Because you've been at the cutting edge, literally at the coalface of doing international law, making international law for many years. So does it work? And then on the flip side, what troubles you when you look out at the world of international law? What keeps you up at night?
It has to work. There's no alternative. The alternative to having international relations governed by a framework of international law is having international relations governed by a framework of power. And there are a lot of individuals who support the power-based theory of international structure. That's ad hoc, that's unpredictable, and we won't always have the power. So be careful about building a structure based on power relationships. Legal framework is what's necessary, what's indispensable if you're looking for peace, equality, democracy. The rule of law is a hashtag that gets kicked around quite a bit. But you and I both have been to places where there isn't a rule of law, and it's not a place where people are able to thrive politically, economically, personally. And so you definitely need this legal framework. What keeps me up at night is the attack on the rule of law. Let's look at the International Criminal Court. It was our idea during the Reagan administration. Of course, the idea was to be a terrorism court, but we came up with this idea. We, the Americans, came up with this idea of an international criminal court. And now we're like threatening the prosecutor with economic sanctions, putting our, for what donor job. And you have to project authority. You have to compete. You have to be clever as a nation, even if you're a superpower. But attacking the rule of law is in no one's long-term interest. And what I'm worried about is that decisions to attack the rule of law actually go through a process, end up on the Secretary of State's desk, the President's desk. Oh, that sounds like a great idea. Let's go attack the rule of law. No, it's a terribly short-sighted idea. But the fact that it's so easily done, and that it's not just sort of talking heads, crazy talk shows saying it, but that it's governments, a number of governments around the globe. That's what worries me.
And so do you have any solutions out there for folks like you and I, or people listening in? Is there something that we can do to help rectify the situation there?
Advocacy. It's important that those of us who believe in the rule of law, that believe in the value of public international law, that believe in human rights, you got to get out there and do it. You got to spend your time thinking about it, engaging in the intellectual debate, the intellectual conversation, and then you got to get out there and do it as well. You can't let these this erosion of international law, or the threats to international law, go unchallenged. And we've all had these experiences. You know, you're young and you read about the UN this and the UN that. You know, all my master students want to go work for the UN. The law students are a bit more jaded, and my alumni who are working for the UN are all like, the law's looking pretty good right about now. Look, it's people, it's countries, it's tension, and you can't be demoralized. You can't be diverted. You know, these institutions exist because it's a fierce bargaining process. Human rights competes with a lot of other things in order to prevail. And you just got to keep at it, and you got to be thoughtful and clever, and work to reform the institutions, work to modernize the institutions. And I guess I come back full cycle. Pick sides. You know, use law to empower. You know, this is what law is all about. It's about empowering people to protect their rights. And so go out there and pick sides and lawyer up folks with their consent, obviously, that are interested in human rights, durable peace, democratic reform. I sound like an advertisement for you know, don't go into biology, don't go into STEM, go into law.
It is important. Quick fire round, Paul, as we wrap up. I've asked you what you wanted to do back in high school. What do you want to do when you grow up now?
I want to continue the transformation of PILPG from an organization to a community. When you run an organization for 25 years, folks start to ask you, so what's the succession plan? What's the transformation plan? What's your long-term goal? If you go onto LinkedIn and you Google, or you LinkedIn Public International Law and Policy Group, you'll find about 1,200 individuals that have at some point in their life become associated with PILPG, either through one of the firms or through a law fellow position or employee position. If I can do another 1,200 in the next 25 years, you know, that's 2,400 folks out there who have that ethos of lawyering peace or prosecuting war criminals.
Awesome.
And having that community is key.
Quick fire round means short answers, sir. Heroes. I think we've already mentioned, well, you've mentioned a few. People that have come before you that you draw inspiration from?
It would be Moore Bromowitz, Jerry Toman, Malcolm Grant, Buzz Thompson, Judge Erickson, folks who mentored me, accomplished in their life, and then took the time to mentor this crazy kid from California who wanted to be a real estate lawyer, but now is here with me in Geneva. Yes, senior folks who mentor. Yeah.
Best movie you've seen on international law?
I don't watch legal movies. I watch that sort of complete escapism.
What's your favorite movie, Paul?
So lately, pick any of the James Bond ones. You just turn it on, you just watch James Bond, things happen, it's interesting, and you don't think about it the moment you turn it off. So anything that you turn off and you do not think about the moment you turned it off goes into my category of favorite movies.
Okay. Are you a Trekkie or a Star Wars fan? Where do you fall on that?
I'm of the original series. I grew up in the original series, and now because we're all at home, now one of the Netflix or one of the online channels has the entire, you name it.
Yes.
All the Star Trek.
All of them. I know. I'm working my way through Star Trek Enterprise at the moment again. It's funny. A lot of international lawyers are more Trekkies than Star Wars. I think it has something to do with the underlying message of the show. Best book you've read on international law?
Oh, here I'm a total nerd. This is Ian Brownlee's Principles of International Law. It's morphed into somebody. It's got a couple of other. You've got it right there. It had all the answers were there. You know, when I found that on the bookshelf in the library, Ian Brownlee was that. I'm going to learn and share everything about international law.
Yeah, and your favorite international law moment in history.
This would have been the conviction of Duško Tadić by the Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal. International law, criminal accountability was back. We had Nuremberg, we had Tokyo, and then 50 years of nothing. When you had that Duško Tadić decision, it was a minor player, but whoa, accountability had returned. And then you you can chart out, from there, all the subsequent tribunals up to the International Criminal Court. That was a point. This is real.
Fantastic. There ought to be an international law about
peace.
Okay, I need to follow up. Don't we have a few international laws about peace?
Yes, we do. And they're ad hoc, they're here, they're there, and they seek to constrain bad behavior, but there isn't an international law which really sets out the framework for a durable peace, which in my view is the rule of law, it's democracy, it's effective power sharing designed for democratic representation, not designed to get to yes. But when you go into doing this, you're cobbling together Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the prohibition on the threat of use of force, sovereignty, territorial integrity, self-determination, but it's a whole jumble that is not synthesized in a way that's effective.
That's interesting. You've mentioned so many great pieces, nuggets of wisdom and advice to students. Is there anything left to say in terms of advice to students that would like to have a career in international law?
Identify your wow. What is it about you that people say, Jonathan, wow, fill in the blank. Have a business plan. This is real. This is serious. Have a business plan. Get a brand. What is your brand? And then go out there and engage in the intellectual debate. Don't be shy. Don't wait for it to come to you. Man, you and we used to have to write op-eds and then sort of try to get some newspaper to publish it. These guys can just go online and blog. Get out there and engage in that intellectual debate, promote your brand, and cultivate your wow.
Great advice. And finally, 3 words. International law is?
Where it's at. I got my extra words on top of yours.
No, that's awesome. Thank you very much. That's it for the quickfire round, and that is it for the interview. Paul Williams, for all the work that you do in assisting to bring peace and justice without the question mark to so many people and regions of our world, for all that you do, also in educating and mentoring yourself, the next generation of international lawyers. Thank you. Thank you for making the world a better place.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been my pleasure, and I appreciate the invitation.